Hi, everyone. I also want to thank Dan for not only bringing me in, but hosting me. So, and Rabbi Aryeh also, who I know for many years. It's only been 30 years. I'm not that old. I've been lecturing. But, please God, I'll do another 50 more. Just a little more introduction about me. My mother made up all the following, so you could take it with a grain of salt. But I was born in Brooklyn. Anyone from New York here? Any New Yorkers? Okay. And I grew up in New Rochelle, New York. I grew up in a non-observant home, Reform, basic holidays, very impactful after-school Hebrew school education. That was sarcasm. I went to public school. Never went to Israel. My parents weren't Zionists particularly. I went to public school, New Rochelle High School. I went to Vassar College. Yes, it was co-ed when I was there, for those who get the inference. I studied Russian language and literature and Japanese in college, because 1,000 years ago when I was in university, those were like the hot languages. Any Russian speakers here? No, not one even. Yet, okay. Yes, I just realized Rabbi Aryeh speaks Russian. We had a conversation. He was interviewing me, and he started speaking Russian. Okay, I'll be careful what I say in Russian. I won't mumble anything. By the time I got to graduating college and I decided I wanted to do international business, that's why I studied these languages. I could read Tolstoy's War and Peace in the original Russian, but I couldn't ask for directions on a street. Because if you want to actually speak a language, what do you have to do? You got to live there. You want to learn Spanish, live in Texas. So I decided, before I go to grad school, I'm going to take a year off. And I'm going to go half a year as a graduate student to the University of Moscow. And then, because I had another half a year to kill, I'm going to go to Israel. I've never been there. I signed up for kibbutz ulpan, pick grapefruits with Danish volunteers, work on my suntan, learn a few words of Hebrew. When I went off to Russia, it was the Soviet Union. And not that you guys are old, but at least people in this audience know what I'm talking about. And when it was the Soviet Union, it was illegal for a Jew to study or practice Judaism. And I literally spent 6 months in Russia cutting most of my classes that I didn't really care about anyway, and hanging out with hundreds of young Russian Jews who were basically risking their lives to do like secret Hebrew school. I used to do anything I could to get thrown out of Hebrew school. And these guys are risking their lives. So it dawned on me, and I should have written a book about it because I had so many amazing experiences, but it dawned on me that if these people are risking their lives to be Jewish, there's got to be something more to Judaism that I hadn't been exposed to. And maybe I should do something just a little more meaningful than go to kibbutz. So I ended up coming to Aish HaTorah. Who's been to Israel? You all been to Israel, right? Everyone been? Who's been to the Aish building, the roof, the nice new building? Right? Wow. When I first came, that building wasn't even built yet. But I was planning to stay for 3 months. I stayed a little longer. I'm now at 8 months and 42 years. So I stayed. I studied full time. I got smicha. I am a rabbi. I don't work as one. My mother said, maybe that's not such a good job for a Jewish boy. So I got a master's degree in history. I'm a licensed tour guide in Israel, an author, speaker. I do blogging. I have a podcast I do every week. I spend about 3/4 of the year in Israel teaching, guiding, writing. Not a lot of guiding, unfortunately, nowadays, since October 7th. But a lot of interest in what's going on in the Jewish world. So I've been coming a lot more abroad because even people who have almost no Jewish identification and are not learned about anything in Judaism are suddenly finding out that people are picking on them for being Jewish. It seems to be more important to the people who hate us than some of the people who are actually Jewish. And people are really woken up, like what is going on here? So I created this presentation. I actually was working on it before October 7th of last year. And it's become very, very relevant because things are moving fast. Antisemitism are at levels we have not seen since the Holocaust. And we need to understand what is going on, where does it fit in, where are we, what can we do? Otherwise, it could be a little bit overwhelming. By the way, if anyone's having trouble seeing in the back, there are a few seats up here you're welcome to take. So the presentation takes about 50 minutes. If you have questions, if you wouldn't mind holding on to them, and I'll be happy to answer them at the end and give you my contact information. I'll show you my website. I'm going to post this presentation online soon again, so you'll be able to watch it again. But it has to do with getting the big picture, basically. And before we start with the future and where we're going in the end, we need to rewind. It's like you're watching a whole series on TV. You don't go to the 4th season, last episode. Even when you start the new season, it gives you that synopsis, previous episodes. Let's do some previous episodes. So let's begin by focusing on what is the most important idea that we, the Jews, gave the world, besides guilt bagels, junk bonds, leverage buyouts, Einstein, Marx, Freud, 22% of all the Nobel Prizes since 1901, 25% of the Fields Medals in mathematics, and all that other great trivia. What's the greatest Jewish contribution to civilization? Yeah, one God, brought to you by the Jewish people. And one God has huge implications for a lot of things. The first book I wrote, there it is, World Perfect down there. Excellent book. Ask my mother, she'll agree. The first book I wrote, World Perfect, deals with the impact of monotheism as the most transformative force in morality and government in human history. But one God also has huge implications for history. Because what we do understand about God, even though he's infinite, is he's the creator, sustainer, and supervisor. It's an idea called determinism. That nothing is happening in the universe that is not under the constant supervision, direction, and control of an infinite intelligence. History is a controlled process leading to a destination. Simply put, we're in a story. We're in a movie. So before we go to the end of the movie, let's talk about the beginning. Let's rewind. Let's do some previous episodes here. And there's a great line there with Winston Churchill. The longer you can look back, the farther you can look forward. So by going back to the beginning, we get a much better sense of why what has happened and where we are going, and hopefully how soon we'll be at the end of the story. So then you'll know when you have to buy an apartment in Jerusalem, because right now the Jews in France are getting all the good ones. So to begin at the beginning with episode 1, we have to start by understanding is, when do we start keeping time from in Judaism? Anyone know? We're in the year 2024, which is from the birth of Jesus. No, 2024 is Jesus. Now, he might have been a nice Jewish boy. I have a whole class on that one. But we don't start our calendar from his birthday. Okay, when do we start keeping time from in Judaism? When do we start from? We start from day 6 of creation. Time begins on day 1. We start keeping time on day 6. What happens on day 6? What happened on day 6? The creation of? Man. You guys are oh my God, what pronouns are you using? Creation of man, oh my God. So politically incorrect. No, it's creation of humanity. Although when I wrote my thesis, I was told I can't use humanity because the word man is in there also. I was really told that. But seriously, I went to Vassar. They used to say things. It used to be Yale sister school before it went co-ed. They used to say things like, when God created man, she was only joking. Yeah. Or what did God say when she created man? I can do better than that. Women, you can get some mileage out of these jokes. But what's the lesson? What's the lesson we learned from the fact that we start keeping time from day 6 and not day 1? The lesson we learn is, number 1, is that the focus of creation is us. Just like in a Hollywood movie, the director doesn't say action until the actors show up and they do the clapboard thing. So too, God, the ultimate producer-director, spends a lot of time doing the pre-production. He doesn't say action and start keeping time until we show up. Okay, but if the camera might be on us, but what are our lines? What's the question I'm asking? It's the biggest question there is. Why are we here? Unbelievably important question. Amazing how many people do not even deal with it. By the way, when you ask, I was in a girls' school and the girls' school today and the boys' school today, teaching the high school kids, and they proved the point exactly. When you ask Jews, religious Jews, why we're here, the girls will all say we're here to serve God. And the boys in the school all say we're here to learn Torah and do mitzvahs. Okay, by the way, you can't serve God. He's infinite. It's a completely lopsided relationship. He can give us everything. We can't give him anything. And Torah and mitzvah is super important. It's the lifeblood, the guidance system, the fuel, the payload of the Jewish people in the world, but it is not the end. It's a means to an end. Judaism teaches that the purpose of creation is, believe it or not, pleasure. Now, when most Jews see that, they say, no, that's not Judaism. Judaism is about neuroses and guilt. What I can eat, what I can't eat, what I can do on Friday and Saturday, why am I not a doctor, when are the grandchildren coming, all that stuff. We're confused about this because we think the opposite of pain is pleasure. It's not true. The opposite of pain is no pain, which is comfort. Pain and pleasure actually go together, like we say in sports. No pain, no gain. The more you sweat for something, the more meaningful it is, which is why winning your Little League championship is not like winning the World Series, especially if you're a Chicago Cubs fan, because it only happens once 100 years, and I'm a Yankee fan, so I got to get that dig in, although I'm still in mourning because the Dodgers beat the Yankees. Anyway, sports, you got to get that in here somewhere. But what I'm telling you now is actually a really dumbed down version of one of the greatest works of modern Jewish literature. Remember, modern Jewish is like the last 500 years, which is a book by the great Jewish rabbi scholar, the Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, and it's called Mesilat Yesharim. And if you want to hear a better, longer version of what I'm telling you now, you're welcome to go to aish.com and put in the search box the 5 levels of pleasure. It's like being a human being 101. Because not all pleasures are the same. There are different levels of pleasure. Judaism says that the lowest level pleasure is physical pleasure, like eating an ice cream. It's not that meaningful and can be a little fattening. Above that is love, more work, but more pleasure. What's the highest? I'm skipping the rest. I'm just going to, spoiler alert, we're not going to do the whole thing now. What's the highest level of pleasure, Judaism says? The word in Hebrew, any Israelis here? Any Hebrew speakers? No, not one. There was one person. Maza devik. What's devik? Devik. Glue, see? Glue, exactly. Dvekut is clinging to God. 1 minute of your soul's direct connection without this, the world. What's the word for world in Hebrew? Olam, which, and the root of olam, it means is hidden. God hides behind the world. Park this all aside, get that infinite light, that's greater than lifetimes of lower level pleasures. Okay, that is the highest level pleasure that there is. That is why human beings were created. Look what the Ramchal says over here. He says, behold, what our sages of blessed memory have taught us is that man was created solely to delight in God and to derive pleasure in the radiance of the Shekhinah, which is the divine presence. For this is the true delight and the greatest pleasure that can possibly exist. And that Garden of Eden thing, which we always see in like medieval art as, Adam and Eve in like this forest. And this is BC, before cell phones. Can you imagine if they had smartphones? Adam and Eve would be doing like selfies and posting them on Instagram, here we are, snake in the background, watch out. But the Garden of Eden is not some Club Med vacation location. The Garden of Eden is synonymous with the ideal state the world was in before we messed it up. When everything's taken care of. No deadline at work, no carpool, no fix the washer, dryer, no getting the term paper in, no shopping, none of that. We're free from all distractions. Everything is taken care of so we can focus all of our energy and all of our time on what? Highest level pleasure, fifth class pleasures, we say. Connecting to God. The Bible should have been one Torah portion long. God put them in the garden, took care of everything, and they hung out in the garden and grooved on the Shekhinah and lived happily ever after. Now, we're not in the Garden of Eden. Something went really wrong. Think about it. According to the pain is the pleasure, and the highest level pleasure is relationship with God. What's the hardest thing to build and maintain in this world? Relationship with God. Everyone wants it. How do we know that? Because anywhere you go in this world, any culture, any period of time, primitive, sophisticated, there's always what in these cultures? Religion, faith, and spirituality. Because it's the deepest yearning of every soul to want to know there's more than just this. But no one wants to work for it, by the way. Like it's like saying, I want to look great, I want to be ripped, I don't want to exercise and diet, I want to play on my phone, eat junk food, and buy that electrode thing that with the battery pack that vibrates my abdominal muscles. Doesn't work. Like dieting doesn't work. Most people diet, gain the weight back. It's permanent lifestyle changes. It's a lifetime of struggle to build and maintain a relationship with God. And the early narrative in the Bible, Maimonides explains this, the Rambam, when he talks about how idolatry came into the world, humanity said, I know God's out there, but it's really hard to relate to an infinite, invisible being. Any of us who pray 3 times a day and try and focus on what we're saying know exactly what we're talking about. Because God is not standing in front of you like I am talking to you. But we all have moments of awe, right? Wow, look at that beautiful sunset, those waves, this volcano, this tornado, whatever. Those things are really inspiring. I'll have a relationship with those things that God put in the world as a way of indirectly having a relationship with the big guy upstairs. But what happened eventually? People just forgot about the big guy upstairs and worshiped the forces in nature. What do we call that? Idolatry, avodah zarah, which is the worst thing you could do. Not because you can hurt God. He's infinite. You don't hurt God. You don't help God. He needs nothing from us. But without relationship with him, we're literally missing the whole point of everything. We're going to eat each other alive because there's a direct connection between our relationship with the big guy upstairs and with each other. When this falls apart, this falls apart. And that's the whole narrative of the flood story, which we kind of read as a cute little fairy tale. You have Snow White and Cinderella and the flood and how did Noah know a male mosquito from a female mosquito. I've been to South Africa. I've seen rhinoceros. I would want to try and push that onto anything, But it's actually a very heavy story. The world goes into decline. The point of creation is lost. By the way, what's the world full of before the flood hits? It's right down there in red. That's the Hamas, which means lawlessness and violence. Isn't that interesting? I wonder if that terrorist organization in Gaza knew that. Like when they're deciding a name, let's go to like Weinstein, Goldberg, and Schwartz on Madison Avenue and ask them for a name of a terrorist organization. It's going to shoot rockets at people and do horrible things to other human beings. They're saying maybe try Hamas. It has a good track record. So God says, use the world correctly or lose it. He wipes out the world, sparing only whom? Noah, hoping he'll do what? Repopulate the world with people who have a relationship with him. Is Noah successful? No. He's righteous enough to save himself, but instead of spending 120 years making a boat, maybe he should have done some outreach, opened up Torch in, in Mesopotamia or something like that. Who knows? By the way, there's a huge message for us in that. It's not okay that we're on the life raft and everyone else is drowning. Forget the rest of the world, our fellow Jews. What's the intermarriage rate amongst Jews outside of the Orthodox Jewish world? It's 70%. It's 70%. We have to be proactive. Anyway, the world continues to decline until we get to the Tower of Babel story. What's the plot of that story? Humanity unites, but for all the wrong reasons. What do we call that today? The UN. Which stands for what? The useless nothings. I'm all for turning the organization into condominiums on the East River and sending the actual organization to the EU. What does the EU stand for? EU. Esav United. Anyway, different story. And humanity unites to rebel against God, and God's thinking, you know what? I tried with Adam. He only had one commandment, and he blew it, and then he blamed his wife. Men have been paying for that one for a very long time. Noah had 7 commandments. God's saying, I give up. Maybe he's thinking, you know the Big Bang Theory, not the TV show, the actual theory. You never heard of the Big Crunch theory? That the universe collapses down to a point of singularity, disappears? Maybe God's thinking, I'm just going to nuke it and try again. We'll get it. Next time we'll get it right. But then along comes one human being, and this is the ultimate power of one story. The ability of one person to change the whole course of human history. And I hold this person as probably the greatest intellectual and idealist of all time. Who am I talking about? Avraham Avinu, who comes from a place called Ur. Where's Ur, by the way? Iraq. We all know where Iraq is. This is Ambrose Bierce, who wrote 140 years ago. He said, war is God's way of teaching Americans geography. I have students who can't find Mexico on a map. You know where it is because it's just south of here. But they can find Iraq and Afghanistan. But out of Iraq, and by the way, Abraham is born in 1948 since creation. Isn't that cool? What's born in 1948 of the Christian calendar year? Israel. The state of Israel, and the father of Israel is born in 1948 Jewish years. But out of Iraq, almost 4,000 years ago, comes one man who's great for 2 reasons. A, in a world that has lost connection with God, Abraham is a radically transformative, free-thinking super genius who's able to think outside the box and connect to a completely counterintuitive, infinite, invisible being. But imagine being the only person in the world to believe in an idea that no one else believes in, and most people will kill you for just saying. How many of us have the chutzpah to even whisper that to their best friends? Chutzpah, such a Jewish word, by the way. Most non-Jews can't say, you notice? They can't say chutzpah, they can't say simcha, and they definitely can't say tuchas. But they have, what does chutzpah mean? Nerve, audacity, gumption, spunk. But that's Abraham. He says, I don't care what anyone thinks. I want truth regardless of consequences. I will live and if necessary, die for reality. Not because God needs us to live or die for him. He doesn't. He needs nothing from us, but without relationship with him, as I said before, we're going to eat each other alive. So he dedicates himself to a unique mission, which we know is chosen people. You guys heard of chosen people? It's amazing. Everyone's heard of it, but no one can explain what it means. Like one day you're going to walk down the street with your yid lid on, and someone's going to spot you. You go, you're Jewish, think you're Jewish, you're chosen. What are you chosen for? Ah! They'll jump all over you and start screaming at you. How do I explain this chosen people thing? The simple explanation from my perspective is this. Abraham says to God, God, I choose you. I choose to dedicate my life and the life of my descendants to one mission, to teaching the world about the reality of you and the values that come from a relationship with you. And God says back to Abraham, you're choosing me, I choose you back. What are we chosen for? We're not chosen for privilege. It may be a privilege to be Jewish, but we're not chosen for privilege. We're chosen for responsibility. What's the responsibility? Well, the word the Jewish world loves to use, overuse, and misuse is tikkun olam, which is fix the world. By the way, the term comes actually, it definitely beats save the whales for sure. But the term comes from the Aleinu prayer. The Aleinu prayer, we say, L'taken olam b'malchut shakai, to perfect the world under the kingdom of God. My friends, the real job of being Jewish, which is lost on the vast majority of the Jewish world, including, in my opinion, most of the religious Jewish world, is Kiddush Hashem. To live and act in a way that inspires other people. It says in Vayikra, Leviticus, God spoke to Moses saying, speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, you shall be holy for I, your God, am holy. And right before the Mount Sinai story in Exodus, in the book of Shemot, it says, now then, if you obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. Indeed, all the earth is mine, but you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. It's to live and act in a way that inspires other people. Isaiah says it beautifully. I, God, in my grace, have summoned you, and I have grafted you by my hand, and I created you, and I appointed you a covenant of the people, L'or Goyim, a light to nations. People are supposed to look at us every day and go, look at those Jews. Look what amazing human beings they are. Look at their families. Look at their community. Look at how they run their business. Look at how they run that cute little country in Israel, the size of New Jersey, surrounded by such friendly, nice nations. That was sarcasm. But seriously, it's about being inspired. We are, guys, my friends, remember that show, for those of us old enough, remember the Mod Squad? Oh my God. We're the God Squad, the messengers of meaning. That is our job. That is our one and only job in the world. And the Torah and the mitzvot are the software that we put into our hardware that enables us to actualize that. So now we have a plot rewrite, because the original plot was what? Humanity hangs out in the garden, building a relationship with God and grooving on the Shekhinah, but they fumbled the ball. So Abraham picks it up and runs with it. So the new plot of human history is humanity returns to God, the Jewish people lead the way. And this, by the way, is a game changer. I tell my students when I'm teaching a semester of history in Jerusalem, you have to start looking at history with Jewish lenses and Jewish software. Don't get distracted. I remember the history I learned 1,000 years ago was the history of the dead white guys of Europe. And it was all about Greece and Rome and Alexander, Napoleon, World War I, World War II. I'm not saying don't learn that. But those are like the battle scenes in the movie that get our attention because they're very dramatic, but it's not the real plot. The real plot of human history starts to run through and connect everything. And if you can start looking at history with Jewish lenses and Jewish software, it's like looking at a different wave of the electromagnetic spectrum. Instead of visible light, you're seeing it as X-ray. Everything starts to fit together and make sense, and history starts to become empirical, like science. I'm telling you, it's a game changer. Everything that's happened in the past and everything you're reading in the newspaper today is somehow connected to this plot of humanity returns to God, Jewish people lead the way. Now, I said this years ago in a class, and a guy was like, wait, Rabbi, time out. He said, Rabbi, what's the world's population? What's the population of the world today?
7 billion.
8 billion. It was 7 billion yesterday. 8 billion. How many Jews are in the world, he asked me? 15 million. He goes, Rabbi, what percentage of the world is Jewish? 0.2%. 0.2%. And he said, Rabbi, you're telling me Jews aren't even 1% of the world's population, but you're claiming the plot of human history is humanity returns to God, Jewish people lead the way. Aren't you being a little egocentric and arrogant here? I said, you're asking the question really aggressively and obnoxiously, but it's a really good question. We Jews have never believed that reality is a popularity contest. Abraham was the only guy believing in one God, and the whole rest, that's why it's called the Ivri's on one side of the river. It doesn't mean he's in New Jersey and everyone else is in New York. He's holding a completely different place than the rest of the world. There's a great quote by a British Lord, Bolingbroke. It's one of my favorite quotes. It's history is philosophy teaching by examples. And why am I bringing this in now? Because I said to the guy, think about this is a great quote. A person could theoretically talk about what ideas will work. Let's run them through the laboratory of history. Like a communist and a capitalist 120 years ago arguing which economic system was destined to rule the world and succeed. Fast forward to where we are today. What can we say about capitalism? Perfect it ain't, but it works pretty darn well. It's lifted more people out of poverty and given more opportunity than any economic system in human history. Versus communism. Now there's a great idea, which historians estimate has led to the estimated death of 100 million people in the last century. So with that in mind, I told this guy who was obnoxiously asking the question, I said, I'm going to give you 2 examples that clearly illustrate that despite our teeny tiny size, we play a very outsized role in human history. Each of these is really a class by itself, but just to give you a taste of it so you get a sense of what's going on. So the number one example, first example I call the infantry example. Anyone here do the military? I did. I was in the Israeli army. I was in Givati, but it was so long ago, my commanding officer was Joshua ben Nun. You know, the same guy who conquered Jericho. I believe 4 of my 5 kids were in the army, 1 in the Navy, 3 in the army. I had 3 combat medics at one time. Used to sit around Saturday night putting needles in each other's arm for practice. By the way, my second oldest son, who's 35 years old and who was a combat medic in Golani, he has been in Gaza 3 times since last October. His unit, now he's with Bislach, his unit was the one that killed Sinwar. Yeah. And my son-in-law, who's a reserve major in Givati at 31 years old, has been 380 days in Gaza. 380 days. Married with kids, 380 days in Gaza. Anyway, it's tough stuff. But every army in the world, when it goes out on maneuvers, not just the Israeli army, goes out 2 by 2 with one guy in the front. And the guy in the front is called, I once asked that years ago, and a guy yells out, dead! But what's the guy in the front called? Point man, exactly. The position of the greatest responsibility. Why? Because he's leading the way. Everyone's following him, but it's also the position of the greatest danger. Exactly, because who's going to get it first? Who's going to walk into the ambush, walk into the minefield? The point guy. When humanity fumbled the ball and we picked it up and ran with it, we became the point nation of history. That we are always, when evil comes into the world, it will hit us first, and you can test this like gravity. It'll start with us, that'll spread to everyone else. That's one example you see. But the second example is another interesting one. Here it is, the point nation, the point people of history. Hollywood movie analogy again. In Hollywood, the actors are stacked in a pyramid. At the top of the pyramid are the lead actors, then the supporting actors, then the bit parts, and the walk-ons. Now, to be a supporting actor, to be a lead actor in Hollywood, like a Brad Pitt or a Tom Cruise or a Jennifer Aniston or a Dwayne The Rock, he doesn't really act, he just looks big. But to be one of these guys is kind of amazing. You get tons of money, everyone loves you. What's the one downside of being so famous and so recognizable?
No privacy.
No privacy, paparazzi everywhere. You got to run through airports with sunglasses and baseball caps on, looking more obviously like a movie star incognito than you would if you just walked through normally. But that's in Hollywood. But in his story, the real story, reality, when we, through Abraham, chose for ourselves a unique responsibility and became the lead actors, we didn't get the fame and the fortune, but boy, did we get the paparazzi. And this is a point which is actually supernatural. But when supernatural and weird happens to you every day, what does it become? Normal. But you know who summed it up the best? The late, great newspaper columnist Charles Krauthammer. He said, Jews is news. And since good news is no news and only bad news makes news, when a Jew does something wrong, everyone goes nuts. And when Israel, think about it, this little teeny island of democracy and free market, tolerant, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, capitalist, open, innovative country surrounded by all these wonderful examples of democracy and tolerance like Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan. No one cares that Assad in Syria has killed 750,000 of his own people and exiled more than 6 million of them. But Israel, oh my God, like the French are telling us how to behave. You know, we say in New York, Statue of Liberty had both hands up and it left Paris. By the way, how many soldiers take to defend Paris? We don't know because it's never been tried. I'm actually banned from being in France. But what I'm telling you is correct. This is the way it has to be. You know who said it the best? Remember Bilam, the non-Jewish prophet hired to curse us? Out of his mouth comes one of the greatest truisms of being Jewish. He says there's a people that dwells apart, not reckoned amongst the nations. We will never be treated like anyone else because even unconsciously the world is aware, you Jewish people and you Jewish state, to quote the motto of Hebrew National, we have to answer to a higher authority. But that's exactly the way it is. Being Jewish might not be comfortable, but it's always meaningful, and the world is always going to remind us that there's us and everyone else. Now, before we continue on to the future now, we have part of the problem with being Jewish, besides a mother who wants you to be a doctor, a lawyer, or accountant, and all the guilt, why don't you call, when are the grandchildren coming? Part of the problem is when you live in a constant state of supernatural, whether it's the good or the bad stuff, all of our history is like extreme, you don't realize how supernatural and weird it is. So it's worth, before we go further, just stepping back and appreciating that. Beginning, first of all, with a quote from the first prime minister of Israel, whose name was David Ben-Gurion. Was he religious? Not at all, but he knew his Bible unbelievably well, and he knew his history even better. What does Ben-Gurion say? In Israel, in order to be a realist, you must believe in miracles. By the way, to be a Jew, you got to believe in miracles. But I found is interesting over many, many years of teaching that when you quote Jews quoting Jews, no one believes it. But when a non-Jew says it, when the Gentile says it, now it has weight. And I have collected so many quotes about non-Jews talking about Jews. So let me share a couple with you just to put us in the right frame of mind to appreciate how wild our history is. So here is the very famous, now has a musical named after him, Alexander Hamilton. Listen to this. By the way, he may have been Jewish, by the way. That's an interesting story I'm not going to go into now. Progress of the Jews from their earliest history to the present time has been as entirely out of the ordinary course of human affairs. Is it not a fair conclusion that the cause also is an extraordinary one? In other words, that it is the effect of some great providential plan. Everything about our history is not normal. And for those in the back, I'll give you binoculars soon so you can actually read the quotes. If anyone wants to move around, by the way, and grab a chair on the side, you're welcome to, seriously. How about this quote? This is Thomas Newton, the Bishop of Bristol, England in the 18th century. I love this quote. He says, the preservation of the Jew is really one of the most singular and illustrious acts of divine providence. And what but a supernatural power could have preserved them in such a manner as none other nation upon earth hath been preserved. Another example that's also great is Nikolai Berdyaev, a Soviet-era historical philosopher from the 1930s. Great quote. He says, the survival of the Jews, their resistance to destruction, their endurance under absolutely peculiar conditions, and the fateful role played by them in history, all this points to the peculiar and mysterious foundation of their destiny. Boom, boom, boom. We don't see it because we live amongst it, but non-Jews who look at our history see it all the time. One last quote from the famous American author Mark Twain, whose real name is Samuel Longhorn Clemens, who also has 7 patents for the elastic in suspenders. You ask, what did you learn in Rabbi's class last night? You know, Mark Twain is. If that's ever in a game show and you win like $5 million, I want half. But what does Mark Twain say? He says, properly the Jew ought hardly to be heard of, but he has always been heard of. He's always been heard of. His contributions to the world's list of great names are way out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvelous fight in this world in all ages and has done it with his hands tied behind him. He's pointing out two very interesting points. Number one is that we shouldn't even be here. Like, no one should hear of us, yet we're so disproportionately impactful, it's kind of crazy. And that we've been able so successful against all odds is even more amazing. And that is really the miracle of Jewish history. The fact that you are sitting in this room today Jewish, 3,338 years since Mount Sinai, and that I live in Israel, a state reborn after 2,000 years of exile, in Jerusalem reunified, when 120 years ago, 0.5% of the Jews in the world lived in Israel, and today more than half the Jews in the world live in Israel. When 120 years ago, one Jew, Eliezer ben Yehuda's son, was the only kid who spoke Hebrew as his first language. And he had a terrible childhood, no play dates, couldn't talk to anyone. And now Hebrew is spoken by literally millions and millions they estimate 10 million people in the world speak Hebrew today. That's an unbelievable thing. We don't appreciate it. But the fact that we're here is really quite amazing. You ever heard the expression, they won the battles but lost the war? We kind of did the opposite. We lost the battles but won the war. Now, what battles and what war are we talking about? I don't mean literally a battle here so much as I'm talking about the struggle about ideas. We lost our country, went into exile, suffered through 2,000 years of persecution. But think about it. In terms of the battle for ideas, the transformative powers of Jewish ideas has far exceeded the powers of the greatest empires in human history. And the power of the Jewish people has never been our physical size, especially me, I'm short. Remember that joke? What's the sign of maturity in a Jewish boy when he recognizes statistically he's got a far greater chance of owning a professional sports team than ever actually playing on one? It's kind of like the ultimate Jewish status symbol. These two little Jewish guys saying, I got a whole football team of large, like Gentiles who smash into each other for me. You know, like it's unbelievable. But look at what Seneca writes, like 2,000 years ago. These are the Romans who we had more, you know the word surus, you know, that's Spanish for trouble? No, it's Yiddish. Look, he says, this abominable nation, which rebelled more against the Romans than anyone else, has succeeded in spreading its customs throughout the land. The conquered have given their laws to the conquerors. And we never had any empire. The only Jewish empire in history has been Hollywood, a complete creation of Jews and not a source of Jewish values. And if you saw Oppenheimer, also the A-bomb. But what's the war we did win? We may have lost our country and gone into exile and suffered horrible persecution and crusades and pogroms and Holocaust, but the war we won was we eradicated, to a large percentage of the world, polytheism from the world and got the world to buy into. There are billions of people today through Christianity and Islam who basically believe in a world that is based on a Jewish worldview of one God, creator of the universe, deterministic worldview, who gives humanity one standard of morality. That is huge, and arguably an even bigger impact, and you can't separate this impact from this impact, is through modern liberal democracy, which is overwhelmingly based on the rediscovery of the Bible as, I want to move this over a teeny bit, there we go. The rediscovery of the Bible as like a political constitution to be used as the role for creating a new form of government in modern history. Look at what John Adams, second president of the United States, but the first president to live in the White House, says, I will insist the Hebrews have done more to civilize men than any other nation. If I were an atheist and believed in blind eternal fate, I should still believe that fate had ordained the Jews to be the most essential instrument for civilizing the nations. If I were an atheist of another sect, I should believe that chance had ordered the Jews to preserve and propagate for all mankind the doctrine of a supreme, intelligent, wise, almighty sovereign of the universe, which I believe to be the great essential principle of all morality and consequently of all civilization. Wow, if you were running for president today, I would definitely be voting for him. And look at what Paul Johnson, the late great Paul Johnson, who wrote a really good book on it's a history of the Jews. I was recommending it for years until I wrote a better one. Crash Course in Jewish History. Again, ask my mother. She will definitely confirm that is true. But what does Paul Johnson say? He says the Jewish vision became the prototype for many similar grand designs for humanity, both divine and man-made. The Jews therefore stand at the center of the perennial attempt to give human life the dignity of purpose. My friends, we do not begin to appreciate how transformative the ideas that we brought into the world through the idea of one God and absolute morality have completely transformed the world. One last quote, just to illustrate that point, is Thomas Cahill in his book, which is The Gift of the Jews. He says, Unbelievers might wish to stop for a moment and consider how completely this God, this Jewish God of justice and compassion, undergirds all our values, and that it is just possible that human effort without this God is doomed to certain failure. All who share the outrageous dreams of universal brotherhood, peace, justice, who dream the dreams and see the vision of the great prophets, must bring themselves to contemplate the possibility that without God, there is no justice. That's an unbelievable idea. Bottom line is, directly or indirectly, the teeny tiny Jewish people who shouldn't even be here have been the greatest civilizing force in human history. So now that we understand the purpose of creation, pleasure, highest level pleasure is relationship with God, humanity blows it, along comes the Jewish people through Abraham, and he chooses for us and himself this unique responsibility to get humanity back to relationship with God. We see that it took a long journey, but we have transformed the world. But now we have to talk about the time frame, because the last part we have to do is like, how much time do we have? Like, when do you have to start looking for that apartment in Israel? Exactly. So, so let's look first of all at the Talmud and Tractate Sanhedrin. Is this? I'm going to see if I make this a little bit clearer. I'm not sure if this is as sharp as it could be. There, it's better. Better. I thought I was going blind. Okay. The Talmud in several places, in Tractate Sanhedrin, in Rosh Hashanah, everyone know the term, the Talmud, the oral law, and the Zohar, which is a book of Jewish mysticism. He says the world is to exist for 6,000 years. In the first 2,000 years, there was desolation. 2,000 years, the Torah flourished. In the next 2,000 years of the Messianic era, but through our many iniquities, all these years have been lost. So let me lay this out and explain what we're talking about. When it says the world is to exist for 6,000 years, it doesn't mean from the Big Bang, which is back here, to the end of time is 6,000 years. It means from the end of day 6. What happens at the end of day 6? The completion of human beings. God, so to speak, takes off his watch, and he figuratively hands it to Adam and says, now that you're the center of the story, you start keeping time from your perspective. What is a day? What are we measuring in a day? One revolution of the earth on its axis. From the end of day 6 to the end of normative history, I'll explain in a minute, is a maximum of 6,000 years. Where does the 6 come from in 6,000 besides the number of times at a wedding or bar mitzvah you go to the smorgasbord before you go for dessert? 6 days of creation, exactly. And Jewish weeks don't begin on Monday. We also don't use the pagan god names in Israel. Moon Day, Sunday, Moon Day. Who's 2, by the way? Well, who is what? Who is he?
One of the Norse gods.
Which one?
That I don't know.
You're the first person ever to even get that. You get 10 points. He's also, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so he's the Norse god of war. And then you have Woden's Day, Wednesday, Thor's Day, Freya's Day. Now you know. Watch those Viking shows. You'll see that they also had a bigger impact than we appreciate. We say Rishon, Sheni, Shlishi, V'chamishi, Shishi, and then Shabbat. First, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. We're being told that every day of the week works that way, but also that the 6 days of creation are also mirrored by each of them as a millennia. And there's 6 of them, normative, and then you get to the 7th millennia. But these 6 days are divided into 3 2,000-year periods, according to that quote in the Talmud. The first is from Adam to Abraham. It's called desolation. It's talking about not that the world didn't exist yet, but there's spiritual desolation, no relationship with God from Adam to Abraham. The next 2,000 years goes from Abraham to the year 200 CE, and that's called Torah. That is the whole national history of the Jewish people in our land. From the birth of Abraham and the creation of a family into a nation all the way through to the writing of the Mishnah. And then after that, we go into exile, basically, in the Roman period of time. But that's when we, the hardware, live with Torah, the software, being this unique nation that's a light to nations. The last 2,000 years, or 1,800 years, because we're not at the end yet, that we'll talk about in a minute, is not that the Messiah is here yet, as much as some Christians might think so, but rather, this is the period of time when humanity collectively moves back to relationship with God. And as a matter of fact, if we laid this model over what happened in history, it's exactly what did happen. From the birth of Abraham to the birth of Christianity, we will exist alone for 2,000 years as the only people believing in one God, and everyone thinks we're crazy and is trying to kill us. That's the story of Hanukkah, for example. And in the last 1,800 years, we've had the greatest spiritual, moral transformation in human history, where today, as I said, billions of people have now basically bought into a worldview, either through religion or through government, that is primarily based on a Jewish worldview. But I want to focus on the end of the story here, because that's where we are. So if we go to the end, and why is it frozen on me now? Don't do this. So annoying. Yeah. My battery's gone dead, I think. No? There it is. Okay. This last 2,000-year period has normative history, and then there's a period of time called the Messianic era. And it's amazing, by the way, how many Jews think the Messianic era, not you guys because you're better educated, but how many Jews think the Messiah is not a Jewish concept? Like the word Christ, where does it come from? It's Greek. Christos means Anointed, which is the Greek version of a Hebrew word, Mashach, which is the root of the word Mashiach, which is the Hebrew version of the Messiah, which goes back to the anointing of people with this holy oil. But forget the Christian concept. The Christians stole the idea from us, used it against us, changed the definition, and don't give us any royalties for it. But the concept is originally Jewish, and the Messiah is a human being with a certain lineage, a certain leadership skills, certain knowledge of Torah and spiritual connection, whose job it is to act as a catalyst. Remember in chemistry, what does a catalyst do? Speeds up a process to prepare not just the Jewish people, but the whole world to enter the final. Oh, yeah, this is not working. So annoying. The whole world to enter the final phase of what's called Olam Haba, the world to come. And the world to come, by the way, is not when you go when you're dead. When you're dead, what is death? Like I always use my phone as an example. Like I got my Samsung Galaxy S23. I want the S24 because it's cooler. What do I want from it? I don't want the phone. This is the body. What happens to this? Recycle to give one of the kids. What do I want on this? The content, the pictures, the contacts, the music, whatever. Where does that go? The cloud, like the soul. Soul leaves body, it goes to Olam HaNishamot. And what does it do in Olam HaNishamot? Goes for highest level pleasure. What's highest level pleasure? Relationship with God, exactly. It gets to hang out with the Shekhinah 100%. And the body goes back to the earth. So Olam Haba, that's Olam HaNishamot. Olam Haba is when the world goes back to the way it was before it got messed up. You've heard of concept resurrection of the dead and final judgment? That takes place in Olam Haba. But the Messianic era, here's Maimonides, the great medieval scholar who died in 1205, explaining to us about Olam Haba, the Messianic era. He says, let no one think that the days of the Messiah, any of the laws of nature will be set aside or any of innovations will be introduced into creation. The world will follow the normal course. In that era, there will be neither famine nor war, neither jealousy nor strife. Blessing will be abundant, comforts within the reach of all. The one preoccupation will be to know the Lord. So the whole world basically lines up behind the Jewish people and wants to get back to the connection to God. So here you have the whole thing laid out. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And that year 6000 brings us into the 7th millennia, which is Olam Haba. But the question is, where are we in the story? Let's do a little bit of math here for a second. No. Forget that. No, we'll get to that in a minute. We're clearly near the end of the story, as I'll show you in a few minutes. Near the finish line. What's the problem with being near the finish line? What's the famous story about a certain animal getting complacent near the finish line? The tortoise and the hare. Okay, remember the hare's way ahead, and what does it do? It lies down, take a nap, and it wakes up in time to see the tortoise crossing the finish line. Who gave us that story? Aesop's Fables. Here he is himself saying exactly the point. Don't let your special character and values, the secret that you know and that no one else does, the truth, don't let that get swallowed up in the great chewing complacency. Meaning, don't get lazy at the end because the finish line is in sight. Because one of the things I noticed, and the last book I wrote is called Destiny, because I like these big Hollywood epic movies like Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and The Matrix and Star Wars. They all have the same story beats and the same hero's journey. Pick any of those stories you're familiar with. There's always a little superhero. Sometimes his name is Frodo. Sometimes his name is Luke Skywalker. Sometimes his name is Harry Potter. He doesn't even know he's the hero most until like the end of the story. He doesn't even want the job. And he's always faced off against some really nefarious dark force that has brought the world into darkness. But he can't escape his destiny because his role is far too central. He's thrown into a series of encounters with the bad guy that he should have lost many times over. Sometimes he barely survives. All of his strengths come out. And what happens at the end? It's Harry Potter versus Voldemort or Luke Skywalker versus Darth Vader and so on. There's a final showdown, right? And evil's destroyed. Good wins, the balance is returned. It's like that in all the stories. Why is it like that? Because that's the way it really is happening in reality. The difference is who's Frodo and who's Luke Skywalker and who's Harry Potter? It's the Jewish people collectively. We're the little superhero in the story. And we're right at the end. And what's the problem with being at the end of the story? When does this final battle take place? That's why it's called the final showdown, because it takes place at the end, because that's when the greatest danger is. And this is precisely the period we're in now. I want to read you a quote from one of the great European rabbis who was killed in the Holocaust. His name is Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman. He was actually murdered by the Nazis in 1941. He never even lived to see the peak of the final solution in 1942. But he writes in his book, Ikvus of the Mashiach, in the Footsteps of the Messiah, if we wish to comprehend the nature of events in our lives, we must seek out those verses and teachings of the rabbis which relate to the period preceding the Messiah. That is the transitional period between the end of the exile and the redemption. If we compare what is written to the events taking place, we will see a mirror image of everything that is happening to us. Everything mentioned in the Torah becomes concrete fact, and conversely, nothing is happening that was not predicted by the Torah in advance. So he's just saying, look at the sources, and you'll see being laid out in front of us what we should expect to see as we get to the end of days. And now that we're at that period of time, I want to now show you some of the sources. They're quite fascinating. The first one is from Rabbi Chaim Vital. And Rabbi Chaim Vital, who's been to Sfat? Okay, Sfat is the great mystical capital of Israel. It became that in the 16th century after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, the largest community in the land of Israel, and many great mystical thinkers, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, people like that, they showed up in Sfat. Coming to learn from Rabbi Moshe Cordovero was a rabbi who was born in the old city of Jerusalem on Or Chaim Street. His name was Rabbi Isaac Luria. And he actually was raised in Egypt, but then he died at 38 years old. But he spent the last few years of his life in Sfat. Tremendous mystical thinker, gave us some of the most transformative ideas in Jewish thought, but he never wrote them down. His main student, Rabbi Chaim Vital, did. He wrote a book called the Eitz Hadas, the Tree of Knowledge. And in that book, he says the following. At the end of days, Israel is destined to experience the Ishmaelite exile. This fifth and last exile will be the most difficult of all. It is the exile of Ishmael. So first of all, wait, time out. What do you mean fifth and last exile? There's only been 2 exiles, under the Babylonians and under the Romans. So this is not literal exile, but if you look at the book of Daniel, which is one of the books of the Hebrew Bible, which is probably the hardest book of the Hebrew Bible to read, because A, it's in Aramaic, and B, it's very esoteric and full of weird prophecies and things that are hard to understand. He talks about these 4 beasts that come out that are interpreted to be the 4 great oppressors of the Jewish people in the ancient world 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, 2,000 to 2,500 years ago, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. What the RE is revealing through what his student is revealing of the RE's teachings in the book Eitz Hadas is that there's going to be at the end of days one final great threat against us called the Ishmaelite exile. Okay, who are Ishmaelites? Arabs. Okay? Now we know where the Arab world comes from. They're literally our brother from another mother because Abraham, we just read about this. Abraham's wife Sarah is barren till like 90 years old and she gives birth. That's a kind of wild idea in and of itself. The whole creation and perpetuation of the Jewish people has always been supernatural, and that's why that pattern is established. But what does she do to ensure that Abraham has biological offspring, since you're not supposed to rely on miracles ever? She gives Abraham a second wife, who happens to be this woman Hagar. Who is Hagar, by the way? She's not some South American like cleaning woman who's brought in through a permit to clean. No, she's Pharaoh's daughter. She's a princess of Egypt. What's that called, having more than one wife?
Polygamy.
Trouble. No, polygamy. What's the punishment for polygamy? 2 mothers-in-law. Oops, I gotta be quiet. Okay, I'm gonna go. Sorry. Okay. That's why Jacob was smart. He married sisters. Anyway, seriously. But through that relationship, half-sibling, literally a brother from another mother, and the Arabs agree with this, by the way, and that they agree with one other thing. We also don't eat pork, but what? Comes Ishmael. But Ishmael his descendants will become what? They'll become a great nation and a faith. The nation are the Arabs and the faith is Islam. We tend to use the 2 interchangeably because Islam begins as a religion of the nomadic Arabic-speaking people of the Arabian Peninsula 1,300 years ago. But today, fast forward, only 30% of all Muslims are Arabs today. You guys know that. What's the largest Islamic nation in the world? Indonesia, exactly. They're not Arabs. Some people think it's France. Give it a few years, it'll be the largest Islamic nation. You know, India, which is Pakistan was founded as the Hindu breakaway from India by the British to kind of solve the problem. India's Muslim minority is 400 million people. That's larger than the population. That's their Muslim minority. They're not Arabs. Neither are the Persians. Neither are the Turks. But the Islam is a byproduct of the Arab mind. So when you absorb the faith, you get the Ishmaelite worldview. So we're told that the final oppressor of the Jews at the end of days, leading the attack against us, are going to be Arabs and Islam. If you look at this quote from Zechariah, the prophet Zechariah, who's one of the last prophets in the Hebrew Bible, he says, the prophecy of the word of Hashem concerning Israel. Behold, I am making Jerusalem a cup of poison for all the peoples all around, and all the nations of the world will gather against it. At the end of days, the world will line up against Israel and come after us. This is the idea of a scenario that we know as Gog and Magog. You guys heard of this, the wars of Gog and Magog? Now, it's very hard to understand exactly what's being talked about. Who is Meshech? Who is Tuval? The technology being described in this battle is thousands of years ago of horses and chariots. That's not relevant. But you have to pull out the theme. What's it talking about? The nations of the world line up to make an attempt to stop Israel from coming back and accomplishing its mission in the world. That's the theme we're looking at. So if you look at the Zohar, which is a basic book of Jewish mysticism attributed to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who wrote this book while hiding in a cave almost 2,000 years ago from the Romans. It's a very esoteric commentary on the Bible. In the Zohar, it says on the book of Genesis, the children of Ishmael are destined at that time, meaning at the end of days, to incite all the nations of the world to come to Jerusalem together with them. As it is written in Zechariah, I will gather all the nations to Jerusalem for war. Now, I talked about this great mystical thinker, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who was the teacher of Rabbi Isaac Luria. He's the author of books you might know, Tomer Devorah and Pardes Rimonim, a tremendously impactful mystical thinker. What does he say? He's saying this 500 years ago. All the nations of the world will ready themselves against Jerusalem and make peace amongst themselves. They will turn against Israel to annihilate it for having established its own government. It will be a time of distress for Yaakov, meaning the Jewish people, yet they will not collapse but be saved from their distress. To keep us from accomplishing our mission and being the nations to light the nations and coming back to make one final attempt to stop us. Which brings us to the phenomenon we are seeing today, which is not just what happened on October 7th, but not just the attacks against Israel, but the massive explosion of anti-Semitism that is taking place in the world today. And if you notice, these are charts about anti-Semitism. I have not yet included the one that has to deal with since last year's October 7th. But if you look at the years with the biggest spikes, this is 2009 and this is 2014. What is that? These are worldwide spikes in anti-Semitism. What was happening during those 2 years? 2009, 2014? No. Gaza wars. We see the biggest spikes in anti-Semitic incidents. And recently in America, it's up 370%. England, it's going through the roof. So what do we learn from that? That there's a lot more going on than somehow the Israel-Palestinian problem or the Middle East. You see, and these are not images I took from October 7th, these are from many years older than that the world, these are not all Muslims running around. These are Europeans walking around with these signs, making a Star of David into a swastika. Look at this one. Hitler, you were right. Unbelievable. There seems to be a huge percentage of the world lining up to annihilate us and going after Jews all over the world. Like, what does a restaurant in LA have to do with what's going on in Israel? So why are they beating up the guy on Pico Boulevard when he's sitting there eating dinner at a kosher restaurant? We have to understand, my friends, that Israel bashing is the final excuse that anti-Semitism is hiding behind. It's hid behind many, many, many excuses. You guys studied anti-Semitism a little bit in history, you know? What are we accused of? Let's see, we killed Jesus, we kidnapped Christian babies, use their blood to bake matzah, we poison wells, we're in league with the devil, we control the world's economy and seismic activity, and solar flares, we trigger tsunamis in Southeast Asia to drown Indonesia with tidal waves, release sharks into the Red Sea to destroy Egyptian tourism, we send vultures to spy on Saudi Arabia, we stole Iran's cloud cover, we have a space laser. If the world believed even 10% of this stuff, no one would mess with us. Maybe we should get together, have a press conference and say, it's true. We do control the weather and the economy and the animals, and we have a space laser. So leave us alone or it's going to end badly for you. Maybe we'll get some traction out of this. But all those ridiculous excuses aside, and this is just another one of them, clearly it is, we have to get to the bottom of what's really going on because it has everything to do with everything I'm talking about at the beginning of this. So I have a whole presentation on my website that you'll see the address. Go there after, it's called Why the Jews. My brother-in-law, by the way, I'll give him a little shout out. My brother-in-law is on tour now in America because he has a great movie that came out about anti-Semitism, but he just came out with a new book, his first book actually. I highly, highly, highly recommend getting it. It's a really easy title to remember. Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Jew? I'm telling you, it sounds like it's a liberally an eye-catching title. What's his name? Raphael Shore, Rabbi Raphael Shore. But just put on Amazon.com, Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Jew? I can promise you it will transform your understanding of anti-Semitism. What I'm going to do in 2 minutes now, he'll do in the whole book, and it'll blow you away. But I just want to spend a couple of minutes before we come to the end here, understanding what is driving this explosion of anti-Semitism now and in general. And we're not going to do this by looking at all the sources. I want to do it through the eyes of the greatest modern anti-Semite of the last 100 years. Who's that? Adolf Hitler. Now, I know it sounds really weird. People yell at me, how can you quote Hitler talking about Jews? Like you walk into Alabama in 1946 and find a guy with a white hood with 2 eye holes in it. Say, what do you think of black people? You're going to take him seriously? Most people who hate other people just say stupid, superstitious, crazy, illogical things. But sometimes the people that hate us the most get us the best. And look at these quotes and you decide for yourself. Look at what Hitler says. It's pretty unbelievable. He says the 10 Commandments have lost their validity. Conscience is a Jewish invention. It is a blemish like circumcision. That is the greatest backhanded compliment ever given to the Jewish people. Jews invented conscience? And they're going after, who first went after circumcision in human history? Which people? What time? What story? The Greeks and Hanukkah. And Hanukkah was not a war of Jewish liberation from Greek occupation. Hanukkah was history's first religious ideological war. It was the pagan Greeks going after the only monotheistic faith in the world. And what was one of the first things they outlawed? Circumcision. Paganism's war against monotheism as pushback against the Jewish attempt to bring a radically different transformative idea into the world. Look now at the Hitler Youth song? You know, the Hitler Youth. These are the guys, all the German kids joined this movement. They had all this hit parade of songs. This is amazing because they say the quiet part out loud in these songs. This should be everywhere. It should be at Yad Vashem on the wall. None of this stuff anyone talks about. Look at this one. Here's the word. I'm sure it's better in German. We are the joyous Hitler Youth. We don't need any Christian virtue. Our leader is our savior. The Pope and Rabbi shall be gone. We want to be pagans once again. That's amazing. Look at the next Hitler Youth song. It's even better. This is unbelievable that this is a song. Jews out, away with the Pope. We have not bled anonymously and without fame. So the German race will be Judaized through Christianity. We are free from the mountain of Sinai. You leave us alone. Whoa. Isn't this amazing? You got to ask yourself when you go to a place like Yad Vashem, like, what are we doing that's so threatening to people? They want to kill all of us. I'm telling you, forget the size of the Jewish people as a physical force. The transformative impact of Jewish ideas for people who have antithetical ideas to that is more scary than anything else in the world. And the scariest part is the people who truly hate us don't care what kind of Jew we are because they understand something a lot of us don't understand, that every Jew has a Jewish soul. We're all super spreaders for this idea, even if we're disconnected from Torah. Abraham Joshua Heschel is a very big thinker, especially in the conservative movement, a great quote. He said, the Jewish people are a messenger who forgot the message. But the people who hate us don't care. You ever notice Hitler didn't interview Jews? Do you know anything about Torah? Okay, you can leave. Or he had different lines, Reform there, conservative, Orthodox, Reconstructionist, Ashkenazi, Sephardi. It's only one line in Auschwitz. It's a big lesson for us, by the way. The people who hate us see us as one people. Why can't we do the same thing? But the problem with all of this is when you have Jewish people forgotten the message and we understand what the plot is about, and it's about getting humanity back to God, and we see the transformative impact of Jewish ideas on the world, to drop the ball that we have been carrying this late in the game is disastrous for the world. And if the world is in a messy state today with everyone arguing and fighting, and we're being affected, we are the reason the world is that way. This is a heavy idea. There's an American Jewish sociologist in the mid-20th century. His name was Will Herberg. And he came up with an idea that was so profoundly impactful, and he was like 70 years ahead of his time. It's called the cut flower ethics. Look what he says in this quote. Listen if you can't see it, it's unbelievable. He says, the attempt made in recent decades of secularist thinkers to disengage the moral principles of Western civilization from their spiritually based religious context in the assurance that they could live a life of their own as, quote, humanistic, unquote, ethics, meaning values without God as the source, has resulted in our, quote, cut flower culture. Listen to what he says now. Cut flowers retain their original beauty and fragrance, but only so long as they retain the vitality they have drawn from their now severed roots. After that is exhausted, they wither and die. So with the freedom, brotherhood, justice, and personal dignity, the values that form the moral foundations of our Western civilization, without the life-giving power of faith out of which they have sprung, they possess neither meaning nor vitality. That's an amazingly powerful thing he's saying there. The ideas that have transformed the world come from the Jewish people via the idea of one God that we talked about at the beginning. When you finally push God out of the way and just try and keep the values without their source, boom, it does not work. And that's the real lesson of the Holocaust. Before you can ask where God is, you have to ask where was man. Because Germany was the most culturally, technologically, governmentally advanced country in the world, all full of these liberal values, and look what they did. They mechanized mass murder on a scale never before seen in human history. Because as the British literary critic G.K. Chesterton said, when men stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. And they're opened up, and then values fall apart, and everyone loses their direction. That's the situation the world is today. The world is literally a rudderless ship. Humanity has lost its direction because it's the job of the Jewish people to be the compass for humanity. The best way it's said, by the way, in terms of summing up anti-Semitism as we approach the very end of my little talk here, was said by Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin. I've noticed, by the way, that sometimes the simplest sentences are the best explanations. I highly recommend putting this on a magnet on your refrigerator. I don't know about you people, but all the really meaningful, important phone numbers and wisdom are all magnets on my fridge. But what does Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin say? When Jews don't make Kiddush, Gentiles make Havdalah. That's an incredible idea. And everyone knows what Kiddush and Havdalah are. They're both made with wine. You go through 6 days of the week, you hit Shabbat, you're on a higher spiritual level, you're filling the world with deeper, infusing it with spirituality. On the wine, you make Kiddush, you're on that level. And then at the end of Shabbat, Saturday night, on wine again, Havdalah, you go back to the lower level. It's not literal, it's figurative. There's a famous expression attributed to Aristotle: nature abhors a vacuum. This is the reality of the world. The world will either be full of the values that we brought into the world through the idea of one God and one absolute morality at Mount Sinai 3,338 years ago, or it will be full of the opposite values. The opposite values are evil. When evil comes into the world, it will target us first, and you can test this like gravity. So if we don't make truth our target, humanity's going to make the Jewish people and the Jewish state their target. And this is the Creator's way of telling us, my friends, you cannot opt out of this responsibility, because if you do, the world is going to be doomed. Which is why today, when you look at what's going on, the defining issue, and the guy by the name of George Gilder wrote a great book called The Israel Test. Anyone read this book? This is a must-read book. He wrote this years ago. He just came out with a new edition of it. He said, just as Jews within a country are the measure of that country's morality and democracy, watch how they're treating their Jews. If they're treated well, it's usually a stable, liberal democratic country. If they start to be oppressed or are being oppressed, it's a country that's totalitarian or moving towards totalitarianism. He said to Israel, the state is the Jew amongst the nations. Show me what a country thinks of Israel, and I'll tell you all about their values and their morality. You think it's an accident that North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, Turkey, Russia, they don't like Israel? Evil will put Jews in their target, and evil will put the state of Israel in their target. That's what it's all about. And this is exactly what's going on. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense, and it's completely consistent, and it fits perfectly into the plot that I've outlined in this entire talk. I just want to end with one final really interesting piece of prophecy, which is not from the prophets, and it's not from a great mystical thinker in Sfat. It's from a place you never find prophecy, the Mishnah. You guys know the Mishnah? The Mishnah is the oral law codified by Yehuda Hanassi 1,800 years ago in Tzipori. And the Mishnah is a legal document. It never goes into this, but it happens to be in the 9th parak of what's called Sota, is the only Nevuah, the only prophecy, and it's unbelievable. I've been reading this for years, and every year it comes clearer and clearer to me. And it's talking about what we're going to expect to see as we approach the Messiah. And it's a little bit cut off, but I'll read it. Listen to this, it's unbelievable. It says, in the times of the approach of the Messiah, impotence will increase and the high cost will pile up. Although the wine shall bring forth its fruit, the wine will nevertheless be expensive. This, by the way, wait, we got Dan here's the economist, I know. This is a really interesting point, because by laws of supply and demand, if you have an abundance of something, what happens to the price? Yeah. It goes down. But it doesn't factor in something that didn't exist back then, which is modern monetary policy. If you overprint your money, what happens? It loses its value and the price goes up, you need abundance. That's the first example I've seen of inflation being described. Very interesting side point. And the monarchy shall be turned to heresy. Oh, they're talking about Washington, D.C. again. And there will be no one to give reproof about this. The meeting place of the sages will become a place of promiscuity. And the Galilee will be desolate, and the Galilee will be destroyed, and the Gavlan, which is the Golan Heights, will be desolate. The northern part of Israel is going to be devoid of people. And the men of the border shall go around from city to city to seek charity, but they will find no mercy. And the wisdom of the scribes will putrefy, and people who fear sin will be held in disgust, and truth will be absent. And the words used in Hebrew is emet nederet. And the word eder is an interesting way of saying absent, because it's based on the word flock, like a flock of animals or goats. The rabbis say in the end of days, the world will divide into 2 flocks of animals that are so different from each other, they'll have nothing to do with each other. Complete split in the world. And we see there's no center anymore, right? Everyone's extreme. Unbelievable. And now you can challenge biological realities, like what is a woman? Come on, give me a break. It's unbelievable. The youth will shame the face of the elders will shame the minors, normal family relations will be ruined, a son will disgrace his father, a daughter will rise up against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. The face of the generation will be like the face of a dog. What does that mean? The face of generation is a euphemism for the leaders of the world. He says, a dog walks before a master and a fool thinks the dog leads. But the dog's on a leash looking which way the master wants to go. In the end of days, there's really no leadership anymore. And then finally it says, the son will no longer be ashamed before the father, and upon what is for us to rely? Only upon our Father in heaven. Which doesn't mean be passive and sit back and wait for salvation, but we got to recognize that that's where reality is. Let's put this together and come to a close now. We're really out of time. But look over here. This is our time frame. How much time do we have left? Let's go back to what we said before. Okay, if we go to, wait, I've gone backwards there. 6,000 is the maximum amount. Remember the idea of the Messiah coming by the year 6,000. What year do we just enter?
5785.
5785. Okay. When you get to 5,000, what day of the week are we in? If every day of the week's 1,000 years? 5,000 is Friday. 6,000 is already Shabbat. 5,500 is halfway through the hours of the day. 5,750 is 3/4 of the way through the day. 5,785. Where are we, you and I, in the ultimate story, not the Hollywood fantasy film? We are late Friday afternoon. This is the time in a religious household when the wife is yelling at the husband, get in the shower, it's going to be Shabbos, 20 minutes. You guys know Murphy's Law, like the chance of the bread falling butter side down is directly proportional to the price of the carpet and those important laws of reality. What's Murphy's Law of Shabbat? No matter when you start plucking the chicken and making the cholent, even if it's on Sunday morning on June 21st, the longest day of the year, what are you doing a half hour before candle lighting? Running around like a chicken with your head cut off. Because everything gets really intense as we approach the hard deadline of Shabbat. So too, we're very close to that. How much time do we have left? A maximum of 215 years. And there are Jewish sources, I don't want to go into it now, that say you can literally get rid of 200 off the 215. That the whole thing is over. I'm not talking Messiah coming in 15 years. I don't know when he's coming. If I knew he was coming, like I said, I would be a prophet. If I was a prophet, I'd be working in Wall Street. I wouldn't be sitting here teaching you. But seriously, I don't need Jewish sources to even tell me that. I don't need Greta Thunberg yelling at me either that I'm destroying the world. Her I want to slap. But anyway, that's a separate story. But look at the situation. How many of us think we got 215 years to get our act together? The world is in a very scary place, but the point is not to freak out, it's to wake up. And to end with one final quote from the great Jewish leader of pre-Holocaust Europe, the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Israel Meir Kagan of Radin. He says exactly this. He says, the entire period of diaspora is like a pregnancy, and the end of exile will be like the pangs of childbirth. This is what the Talmud in Shabbat called Chevlei HaMashiach, the birth pangs of the Messiah. As our sages said, if you see suffering increasing and threatening to drown you like a river, expect him. As things are picking up, we get little breaks, but boom, again, it's getting real close. Now again, we don't know when exactly the Messiah is coming, but if you look at the prophecies we're looking at, it looks like it's pretty close. And the Zohar, that basic book of Jewish mysticism, ends with this quote, which I think sums it up beautifully. It's not God's will that the date of the Messiah's arrival be revealed to man, but when the date draws near, even children will be able to make the calculation. And it's pretty clear that that's where we're at today. So just to end with some food for thought here. Number one, as scary as this might seem, do not panic. Seriously. If you look, you see that over there? That's a t-shirt that I made. Here, I got the real one right over here. Here it is. I have a bunch of books. I also need a clothing line. Here's my t-shirt. I made this I started selling this in 2007. Look what it says. It says, civilizations, nations, and empires that have tried to destroy the Jewish people and their status today. Ancient Egypt, gone. Philistines, gone. Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, Roman, Byzantine empires, gone, 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 gone. Crusaders, gone. Spanish Empire, gone. Nazi Germany, gone. Soviet Union, gone. Iran with 3 question marks. By the way, during this Gaza war, someone took my picture, the picture of my shirt, put it online, and photoshopped in here, Hamas in progress. But then what does it say at the bottom? The Jewish people, the smallest of nations, were the friend in the highest of places, so be nice. What do you think? 1 for every member of the General Assembly and 2 for the president of Iran? By the way, a lot of Jews are afraid to wear this shirt. Like, I can't wear it, don't kill me. I said, who, a Babylonian? He's gone. Just don't go to Tehran with it, you're fine. You know who buys and wears all these shirts? Evangelical Christians. They're always, I've been selling so many since October 7th. They're always going to my Instagram page and Facebook. Rabbi Spiro will live in Yazoo, Mississippi, and I wear your t-shirt in my church because God loves the Jewish people. Because they see something that we don't see because we're in the middle of it. They see, like I said before, the rebirth of Israel, the survival of the Jewish people against all odds. We've outlasted all the people to try and destroy us, the reunification of Jerusalem. It's all supernatural. We have to recognize that when it all is done and the smoke clears, we will still be here, but it doesn't mean we can be passive. So to close with a little food for thought, we got to take a little action here. So here's my little call to action to close with. Number 1, you have to be awake. Philip Dick, I think this is funny coming from a science fiction writer. He says, reality is what continues to exist whether you believe it or not. You can ignore this, but it's going to happen anyway. It would be stupid to ignore it. Number 2 is be truth seekers. My Rosh Hashiva, Rabbi Noach Weinberg, used to say the battle for life is the battle for sanity. We have to struggle to be awake and be focused and not go back to sleep. Number 3, you have to be educated. You can't represent the Jewish people till you know what the Jewish people represents. Jews are, we're like an unbelievable high-powered engine for changing the world, but you can't do that without the right software and the right direction system, and that's what the Torah is all about. Ignorance is more dangerous to us than anti-Semitism, believe me. We have to be balanced. And this is especially a message for the religious world. Judaism has commandments between our fellow human beings and with God. We have to have a balanced approach to those. We can't obsess on this and ignore this, and we can't just focus on this and ignore that. You have to be twice as careful what comes out of your mouth as what you put in your mouth. Super important. We have to be united. Like I said, we're all part of one family. We have to focus on not what divides us. We need to make a collective paradigm shift to focus on what unites us. Or our enemies will force us to do that. And if you live in Israel, you know that all the greatest explosions of external threat to Israel, since I've been there for the last 40 years, were always preceded by internal fighting in the Jewish people. Before October 7th, what was going on last year was the worst infighting I've ever seen in the country since I lived there. It's like God is saying, my children, you want to kill each other, I can't watch. I'm going to send non-Jews to do it. We have to be focused. We have to focus on what our unique responsibility is in the world and not lose sight. Torah and mitzvahs are not the end. They're the means to the ends. We have to be that God squad. We have to be proactive. We have to constantly look for ways to inspire other people and be a good role model. And this is little stuff. If all of us do the little things. Remember that movie, Pay It Forward? Where this little kid decides to do something nice for two people and get those two people to do people. Before long, you've changed the world. Little things done by a lot of people can make a huge difference. We can't wait for some big guy to come along and change everything for us. We have to be the change that we want to see happen in the world. We have to crowdfund Kiddush Hashem. That's exactly the point. That all of us doing the little things will make a big difference. And my friends, if we can just wake up and not go back to sleep after this presentation and spread the word, we'll see things changing, absolutely. And then we will see coming soon to a Jerusalem near you, the third Beit HaMikdash, and to close with the beautiful words that God said to us before he gave us the Torah at Mount Sinai, which was the national experience of prophecy of the entire Jewish people. He said, now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. Indeed, all the earth is mine, but you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And let's hope that we merit to have a unified, proactive, educated Jewish people who is finally pushing to finish the job that Abraham started 3,700 years ago. And if we start to move in the right direction, we're going to see big things change in the world. They'll stop fighting against us and they'll line up behind us. And then we will get peace for ourselves and the world. And then we'll all be hanging out in Jerusalem at the temple with the high priest partying. We should merit to do that soon and in our days. And thank you very, very much. Thank you.